He was the daredevil who rewrote the laws of aviation, the strategist who shocked Japan with a bold strike from the skies, and the commander whose courage became legend. Jimmy Doolittle, the mastermind of the Doolittle Raid and one of America's most decorated aviators, lived a life that soared beyond fear, beyond possibility, beyond the limits the world believed existed. He was a scientist with the instincts of a fighter, a pilot with the mind of an engineer, and a leader whose audacity helped turn the tide of World War II. But behind the medals, behind the missions, behind the roaring engines of wartime heroics, there was a father. A father whose life at home was defined not by explosions or aircraft maneuvers, but by two sons, James Doolittle Jr. and John Doolittle. They grew up in the long shadow of a national icon, a man larger than life, often absent, but deeply committed to shaping them with the same values that shaped him: discipline, bravery, intellect, and relentless determination. Their childhood unfolded in a world where danger was familiar, sacrifice was expected, and honor was not a word, it was a lifestyle. While Jimmy Doolittle flew missions that risked everything, his sons learned to navigate the emotional cost of having a father the world claimed as its own. Some followed in his footsteps, others carved a different path, but all were shaped by the force of his legacy. Tonight, we step beyond the cockpits and headlines to discover the intimate side of a man America knew as a hero, and the two sons who carried his name into the uncertain skies of their own lives. Number 2. James Doolittle Jr. James Harold Doolittle Jr., born on January 13, 1934, was the eldest son of one of the most daring aviators in American history. From the moment he entered the world, his life was intertwined with altitude, risk, and the impossible standards set by a father whose courage had become myth. Growing up as Jimmy Doolittle's firstborn meant living with a name the world already idolized, a name associated with heroism, daring, and national pride. But James Jr.'s story is not one of triumph. It is the story of a son quietly overwhelmed by the weight of his father's legend. From childhood, James Jr. was introspective, intelligent, and sensitive. Where his father thrived on adrenaline and challenge, James Jr. struggled with internal battles he tried desperately to hide. He admired his father deeply, but felt he could never live up to the daring bravado America associated with the Doolittle name. Still, he tried. He followed his father into the military, joining the United States Air Force. The decision was both tribute and burden, a way to honor the man who had changed the course of World War II, yet also a weight that pressed on every inch of his identity. As a young officer, James Jr. worked diligently, proving himself through discipline rather than theatrics. But beneath his uniform lived a mind becoming increasingly tormented. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, James Jr. battled severe mental illness, including deep depression and paranoid episodes. His condition worsened during his Air Force service, reaching a breaking point during a deployment to Europe. In 1962, amid deteriorating judgment and overwhelming anxiety, he walked away from his post, an act the military classified as desertion. For the son of Jimmy Doolittle, a Medal of Honor recipient, a national hero, this was unthinkable. The Air Force court-martialed him. The public, if it had known the details, would have been stunned. And Jimmy Doolittle himself, a man defined by discipline and honor, was shattered. Doolittle fought to protect his son, pleading for understanding, trying to shield him from the harshest punishments. He understood that James Jr.'s actions were not acts of defiance, but the desperate outcome of a mind in crisis. But even a hero cannot rewrite military law. James Jr. was discharged, alienated, haunted by guilt he could never escape. In the years that followed, his mental state spiraled further downward. Treatment was inconsistent, support was limited, and the shame of failing to meet the expectations attached to the Doolittle name consumed him. On November 2, 1958, at only 24 years old, James Doolittle Jr. took his own life. His death devastated Jimmy Doolittle. Friends close to him said that no wartime loss, no aviation accident, No strategic failure ever wounded him as deeply as losing his eldest son. It was the tragedy he rarely spoke about, the heartbreak that remained hidden beneath the image of the invincible warrior. James Doolittle Jr.'s story reveals the human cost of heroism, the quiet suffering that occurs in the shadows of greatness. He was the son who inherited not his father's fame, but the unbearable pressure that came with it. Among Jimmy Doolittle's two children, James Jr. is the sorrow, the son whose life ended too soon, leaving behind a grief that humbled even one of the greatest heroes in American history. Number 1. John Doolittle. John Paul Doolittle, the younger of Jimmy Doolittle's two sons, was born on November 8, 1938, a time when aviation was transforming from daring experimentation into a symbol of American progress. His father was already a legend in the making, pushing the boundaries of flight, earning degrees in engineering, and redefining what a pilot could be. Unlike his brother James Jr., whose personality was introspective and fragile, John grew up with a steadier compass, practical, grounded, and driven by a quiet determination to build his own identity rather than live inside his father's shadow. But with the name Doolittle, escaping the shadow was impossible. Realistically, John never tried to escape it. He tried to meet it on his own terms. From an early age, John showed the traits his father valued most: composure under pressure, analytical thinking, and a deep sense of responsibility. He learned to fly, yes, but he approached aviation with engineering precision rather than the daredevil bravado that defined Jimmy. He studied aircraft structure, not stunts. He learned systems, not spectacle. And he adopted the discipline his father lived by but rarely articulated. John entered the United States Air Force, following the trajectory expected of a Doolittle son. But unlike his brother, whose military experience became a source of pain and unraveling, John found stability and purpose in uniform. He served as a pilot and intelligence officer during the early Cold War era, a time when America's strategic future depended on men capable of handling pressure with rational, methodical precision, exactly the strengths John possessed. Still, being the son of America's most celebrated aviator came with its own subtle burdens. John was often introduced not as an individual, but as Jimmy Doolittle's boy. He lived with the unspoken expectation that every flight, every decision, every step must honor a father whose courage had become myth. Yet he handled this pressure with a quiet resilience, neither chasing fame nor resenting it. After leaving the Air Force, John transitioned into the private sector, working in aerospace and defense industries, where his technical expertise and calm leadership earned quiet respect. He chose a life away from cameras, headlines, and legacy narratives. His father had lived in the spotlight for decades. John chose the engineering room, the board meeting, the quiet office where real impact happens without applause. He married, raised a family, and built a stable life defined by discipline and loyalty values he inherited not from the heroic myth of Jimmy Doolittle, but from the private father who valued integrity over glory. As Jimmy Doolittle grew older, it was John who became his constant companion, the stable presence guiding him through retirement, documentaries, military commemorations, and the long shadow of history. John helped manage his father's archives, coordinated military honors, and ensured that the legacy of the Doolittle Raiders remained preserved. Where James Jr.'s tragedy broke Jimmy Doolittle, John's quiet strength sustained him. John Paul Doolittle died in 2019 at the age of 80, long after his father's legend had become part of national memory. He left behind not a public legacy, but a private one built on steadiness, service, and loyalty. Among Jimmy Doolittle's two children, John is the anchor, the son who stood firm where tragedy struck deepest, the one who carried the family's legacy into the modern world with dignity, humility, and unwavering resolve. The legacy of Jimmy Doolittle and his two sons is a story that reveals the profound truth hiding beneath the uniform, beneath the medals, beneath the legend of one of America's greatest aviation heroes. It is the story of a father defined by daring ambition and two sons shaped by the impossible weight of living in the shadow of a man the world treated as invincible. James Doolittle Jr., the eldest, inherited the sensitivity, introspection, and emotional fragility that his father's steel-hard exterior never allowed him to show. He tried to follow his father's flight path, entering the Air Force with discipline and determination. The pressures of military life and the unbearable weight of his family name ignited a devastating mental collapse. His tragic death at 24 was a blow from which Jimmy Doolittle never recovered. It was the silent heartbreak behind the Medal of Honor, the pain that lived beneath the hero's stoic gaze. John Paul Doolittle, the younger son, chose a different path, not of spectacle, but of steadiness. He became the quiet compass of the Doolittle family, serving with discipline in the Air Force, building a respected career in aerospace, and eventually becoming the guardian of his father's legacy. While James Jr.'s life broke under the weight of expectation, John carried that weight with strength, ensuring that the Doolittle name moved into the modern era with dignity and clarity. And at the center of this story stands Jimmy Doolittle himself, the fearless pilot who led men into impossible missions, yet found his greatest vulnerabilities at home. His public life was defined by courage. His private life was marked by heartbreak. His sons reflected both sides of the legendary aviator, the human weakness and the heroic strength. The Doolittle legacy is not simply about a raid over Tokyo. It is not just about aviation breakthroughs or wartime brilliance. It is about the human cost of greatness, the weight carried by a family asked to share a father with history, the silence left by a son who fell, and the quiet endurance of the son who remained. In the end, the story of Jimmy Doolittle and his two children reminds us that even heroes bleed, even legends grieve, and that the truest measure of a life is found not only in the skies conquered, but in the hearts left behind.